What's up, everybody? You're listening to the Hustle and Flowchart podcast with your boys, Matt Wolf and Joe Fear.
I know we've chatted about it, I think both in person and also just on calls, but I mean, you digest so much information. You speed read like a crazy person, but you actually retain it, and you have a whole system that happens after you digest information. Could you share some of that? I mean, I know you've...
Yeah, sure. It's called, so the way I used to do it was I would read a book, highlight it, and then sometimes I might read the book twice. One time where it's really being read to me while I'm working out. And then for that, I would use an iPad app called Quick Reader. Oh, no, sorry. Quick Reader is the speed reading program. The one that would read to me, but also like pace on the screen, was VoiceStream.
Yeah.
Like
I use that all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I'd go through that. I'd go through the book like in an hour and a half or 2 hours with VoiceStream. Then I would sit down and read it and highlight it. Then I would take those highlights and then I would speed read it in Quick Reader. And I could do that like, in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And that's the way I did it for like a decade. And then I'd say a couple years ago, it just went through more stages where Quick Reader, highlight, but then instead of taking the highlights and just putting it into my speed reading program, I'd actually take my highlights and put them in Evernote, and then do this process that I learned from Tiago Fort called progressive summarization. And the idea is that to know just by looking at a note how valuable that note is to you, and the value of the note being based on like how much engagement with that note you've had prior. And so each time you touch a note, kind of like the idea of like office productivity, only touch things once. With this, it's like every time you touch it, do something with it so that you can kind of get a sense of how much you've interacted with it. And so the first time you go through, like this is Tiago's process of progressive summarization, the first time you go through a note, which now this note is already just what I've highlighted out of a book, right? So now it's just the highlights. Now when I read it, I'm bolding anything that I think is important. Now, I thought everything was important, like when I was reading it in the book, but now I'm trying to be more selective, right?
Yep.
So it's now what's important of just this stuff. And so I'm bolding that. Then that's my first pass, but then, and that's always the longest pass because I'm having to reread the whole note, right? But the next time I see that note, if I see that bunch of parts are bolded, I know that I've already gone through this. So now all I look at are the bold parts, and then I'm highlighting anything that I think is important in the bold parts only, right? And so now the next time I see the note, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that's bolded. There's going to be a few things that are highlighted. I know that the highlighted of the bold are the most important points, and that's what I will now interact with. Like the little boxes where I'm now putting my thoughts based on that, right? That's the process I go through. And what I've kind of realized also is that I need to start doing that, or I started doing that this month for Steal Our Winners, because someone else was like summarizing stuff. And I think that a few things get lost as far as things that I would think are important, but are not the number one thing of that interview. And I want to make sure that people are aware of those things. So it's nice to be pleasantly surprised when someone drops a strategy that you weren't even expecting, because that's not even on the topic of what the segment is about. But it would be nice also for people when they're skimming it to know that that's there.
Yeah.
So it's about teaching my team how to do that as well, and then doing it with them for those things. But yeah, I mean, for me, my memory isn't that good. It's more about interacting with stuff enough so that like it just becomes that familiar. But if it's read once, like, I could watch a movie this weekend with Kim, and if you ask me next week what movie I watched, I'd have no idea.
So there's hope for me after all. No, I'm just thinking like, because you've talked about, and I don't know if it's true or not, but you kind of have this ADHD brain.
Yeah.
Just the fact that someone like you don't think you have a great memory, but you have a process and it serves you well, and it keeps you on point with what's actually important. I think is smart when it even goes back to your question of like shiny object. Oh, great tactic. Well, let's dive deep a little bit, more in that tactic and see if it actually does fit in something I'm doing.
There's a difference between a strategy that is new that versus that you should be using in your business versus just a shiny object, right? And I think a lot of people have difficulty kind of when looking at something determining whether it's one or the other. Right. But and it's kind of critical because the times when my business has grown the most or the businesses that I've interacted with have grown the most is oftentimes with a breakthrough, right? I have that $1 billion testimonial from Agora because I saw the VSL that John Benson had invented. Like I had nothing to do with it. But I saw it like a week after he had invented it and put it out there. And and I brought it to Agora, and Agora, like worldwide, conversion rates went up between 300 and 400%.
Wow.
So we went from $250 million to over $1 billion that year. But like nowadays, if we test a VSL versus a sales letter, there's little to no difference. And it was the same with automated webinars, like for me, and when I gave it to Brunson and Phil, same, like we were all crushing it. The registration rate was insane. The show up rate was insane because we were the only people doing automated webinars at that time. And so like my business back then, like Strategic Profits went from selling like 10 back ends a month to selling like 10 to 15 a day. Like
Jeez.
I never like was making like so much money consistently as that. And so both of those times were, you could say they were shiny, bright objects. Like they were, oh, here's another way of doing something you're already doing. But, but those two things were life-changing for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, how do you know if you're exploring like a distraction versus the next like huge, like, major step up for your business? And I think most people don't know how to distinguish the two. And I need to give some thought on how best, to me, it's more intuitive. But that's not the best answer. So I'm going to have to give some thought to that.
It's a future live stream.
Yeah.
You can make it one of those.